Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're so happy to have you around. This is our fifth Ketchup session, which is a program run here to celebrate CAIST's 20th anniversary and fostering conversations with artists that are part of our collection. So I'm Catalina Lozano, Director of Programs in Latin America for CAIST, and I'm very happy to be welcoming today Fernanda Brenner, who will be hosting Beatriz Santiago Muñoz and Ana Vaz, two incredible artists from Latin America. And Fernanda is the artistic director and founder of Pivô, an incredible space in São Paulo. And also she's an advisor to CAIST. So she advises me and the collection from Latin America. Thank you so much. And I leave the floor to Fernanda.
Well, hello, everybody. So first of all, I'd like to thank CAIST for the opportunity to host this talk with two artists I admire so much, and also with whom I had the pleasure of working recently in solo shows at Pivô. Beatriz's project Oriana is now on view, and actually in this last weeks. So if you're watching us from São Paulo, please go check. And Ana, who is currently working on a project meant to open next year that will revolve around her film in the making, A Noite in America. It's Night in America. That's going to be premiere next November, like now in November, in the Jeu de Paume in Paris. So first of all, I guess there are many overlaps between your practices. So this is why I thought of inviting you to the session. The experimental approach to moving image, the blurred limits between fiction and documentary, the very personal way in which both of you conduct dialogues and interact with your subjects, and also with the sites and situations in which your films unfold. So I guess perhaps one could even say that you make films with the sites instead of about it, in the sense that you both depart from a strong observational approach and mainly address backgrounds and circumstances in which you are implicated in or are very familiar with. So, for example, like the effects of the US military presence and coloniality in her native Puerto Rico and the Caribbean in the Beatriz's case, and also the link between the arid central west region of Brazil, where Brasilia, the capital, is, and the Amazon forest, a connection underscored by the effects of extractivist industries persistently financed by the Brazilian government, whose presence and disastrous humanitarian and ecological side effects, and I have been investigating for the past few years. So I guess some other common themes which I like to bring it out here so we can discuss informally after your presentations is the many forms of the expansion of the mind, the degree of progress and development-oriented politics, and I think especially how bodies relate to other bodies, human or non-human, so animals, plants, sites, seasons, tides, droughts. So I pass the word to Ana, that will go first. So we delve a little bit in the projects you've been working recently and also the key aspects of your individual practices.
Hello and good evening. Hello, Fernanda, Bia, Catalina. It's a real pleasure to be in conversation with you here tonight or today on the other side of the Atlantic. I'm also very honored and happy to be, even if from afar, in conversation with an artist like Bia, mediated by Fernanda, both women who I admire and who I have had the chance to be in contact with either through Bia's work or through the work that I've been developing with Fernanda at Pivô in São Paulo. This format is always strange because I'm here speaking with you and there seems to be a great distance. So I want to invite you to intervene and interfere at any point in this very brief introduction of what I'm very currently working on, which is the project introduced by Fernanda. It is Night in America and Noite na América. It's Night in America. It's a project that's currently moving underneath my feet, as next week the project will be shown for the first time at the Jeux de Paume in Paris. And it's a project that really asks for a kind of a fluidity and a kind of a reaction also to each context of its iterations. And Noite na América was filmed in Brasília, where I was born. And as Fernanda has mentioned, Brasília has been a kind of a magnetic field, a gravity field in my work, mostly because I think that the city historically reperforms the gesture of coloniality in Brazil's landscapes and territories by wanting to build a history or a story ex nihilo, inaugurating a kind of utopian modernity in the country. And that said, of course, as any utopia, I always say that the problem with utopia is the U before topos. So a kind of a rejection of the territory, a rejection of history, a rejection of the layers that are hidden by the building of this modernist dystopia, I would say. And so a lot of my work as a filmmaker has been about excavating the layers underneath this architecture, trying to make connections with perhaps a subterranean dimension of this place, of this site, of this territory, and its connections with other places, be them spectral or material. To begin speaking about It Is Night in America, I have to really use the first person and tell a little bit of the story of how this film was, how it was born inside me, or how intuitively it came to me. Basically, as I said, I'm always very connected to Brasília, and in the last year, late December, I was going for a walk in a region, in a part of the city that I know very well, and was confronted by a dead body that appeared in front of the road in front of me. And straight away I froze, and took me a while to approach this body and understand what that body was. I did not know if it was a dog, if it was a human, what kind of body it was. And all this questioning started really working on me, on my body, on my senses. As finally I approached this body, I realized that it was the body of a baby anteater that had been poisoned or run over. And I did not know how to react to this death, how to react to this dead body, how to, in one way or another, honor or make a rite for its passing. And moved by this grief, or by this complete lack of means to answer to why this body would have ended up there, I began a kind of a detective work, I would say, in trying to understand how come this wild animal that would never be in the center of the city would end up dead on the side of a road. This detective work kind of took me into many different paths and conversations, but mostly with the environmental police in Brasília, that is responsible, who are responsible for rescuing wild animals in the city. Ever since the increasing exploration by the monocultural plantations of soy and the exponential growth of the urban landscape of Brasília, there has been increasingly a great deal of wild animals that have been trying to find refuge in the city. I would say that this death is not only a singular death, but it's a systemic death. It's a death that is part of a much larger fleeting movement of lives that have been cornered, lives that have been, taken completely outside of their environment, outside of their capacity to survive and go into the cities in order to find refuge. I got to then learn that the environmental police was rescuing around 450 to 500 animals per month in Brasília. And that seemed to me such a violent number of lives that have been found in this context. And from there onwards, I found myself really in the middle of this kind of eco horror, if I am to really use the name of the genre, which I feel this film in the making really makes reference to. So if we think about the tradition of eco horror as films that were made mostly in the 1950s and the 1960s, in which often you'd have a protagonist that is a non-human protagonist, so an animal that would come back to take revenge on a humanity that is uncaring for their lives. So we can think of classic examples like Godzilla or King Kong, and many other more B Hollywood productions that would be thinking about how these forces would come back to kind of take revenge onto humanity. This is something that I spoke at large with a Brazilian philosopher, Juliana Fausto, who has been developing a great deal of work around what she would deem a cosmopolitical thinking around animal life. And so with all this in mind, this kind of feeling of astonishment and also this feeling of a horror that is currently and has been, but is currently installed in a very grave way in the political and social body of Brazil. I think that A Noite na América is a way of also displacing the drama, the political drama, from the usually human protagonists towards those who have been expelled of society in a way, who have been expelled from the urbs, who have been expelled from cities. And so I think that also It's Night in America, it's a way of going further into a question that has haunted me as a filmmaker always, which is this enormous distance that cinema has historically had between subjects and the filmmaker, between what's in front of the camera and what's behind the camera. So a lot of the cinema that I propose myself to do is about breaking this silent pact and acknowledging that whatever we film looks back at us, whatever we look at looks back at us. And so in many ways, I feel that It Is Night in America is also a response to previous works, such as There Is Land, A Terra, which is a film that I also made in Brasilia about 4 years ago. But perhaps in order to situate this amalgam of words and stories that I'm sharing with you right now, I would like to perhaps just share something that is a fragment that has haunted me in the making of this film since the beginning, which is a sound that I would prefer not to tell you what it is straight away. And I would just ask you to either close your eyes or look anywhere you like in order to hear 2 minutes of a recording that was made in Brasilia in the zoo, which I will later reveal to you what it is. So if I can ask for just some technical support to play that sound, thank you. So this haunting and intense sound that you just heard was recorded, as I said, in the Brasilia Zoo, and is the sound that is made every morning by monkeys called bugios, who had been rescued in the Amazon forest during the construction of an enormous mining dam that was a failed infrastructural project called Belo Monte that many people might know of. And these monkeys had been rescued there and taken to the Brasilia Zoo, where they are now captive for life. The amazing thing about the sound that they make is that every morning when the zoo is just about to open, they sing together as a kind of act of presence to say that they are there, that they are present as a group. And for me, this is probably one of the most haunting and strong elements that kind of holds Noite na América together as a gesture of embodiment, as a gesture of making body, with the world, which is something that's very dear to me, and I'm sure very dear to Bia too. So maybe I will stop there for a while and allow this conversation to be a little bit more fluid. But thank you.
Thank you, Anna. It was great to hear the sound. So I think now, Bea, it's your turn.
Thank you. That was really amazing listening to that. I guess first, thank you, Fernanda, Catalina, Cadiz, everybody who's behind the scenes, making sure that we don't mess up the tech. Yeah, it was just, as I listened to that, I remember the first time I heard howling monkeys in Chiapas, and there was this amazing, like, you would see them during the day if you could catch them. They're this tiny animal, and then at night, or maybe it was in the morning, and I can't quite remember, but I remember it being at night, you would hear the sounds of King Kong. It was just and if you let your mind go into a dream state, you would think that they had gotten larger at night and then smaller during the day, to be able to go unnoticed. So okay, I'm going to talk about Oriana, which is a project that I have been working on for a long time, and has gone through different processes, and just recently opened as an 8-screen installation in Pivô. And so I wanted to show some images of its previous forms and talk a little bit about it. So Oriana is a very, very loose adaptation of Monique Wittig's 1969 experimental novel, Les Guerrières. And at the moment I began thinking about making this work, making this loose adaptation, I knew why I wanted to do it. It was a book that I had been sort of carrying around with me, like really affected by it, but not totally understanding why, like how it did what it did, since I was in college. And I think that there was another moment in which I understood that the way that I go about making my work, which is through sort of accidental observation of the world around me, also had a kind of gender structure to it, because of the ways in which women did not occupy common public space. And so I ended up with many men in my film, and many men thinking, and many men doing. And it was through, I thought, I'm just following sort of what I see and what I feel, but really there's a difference in where women can go, where women's bodies can go in space, and where speech enters or doesn't enter. So there was this moment in which I remembered this book and what it did, and I understood that then I needed to go about things with through a different structure. But though I proposed to make an adaptation of this book and to really think about adapting the way it works. So it's about a kind of worldwide rebellion against patriarchy, but it's not really not so interested so much in story, but in speech, language, and sensorial reality. So those, in a way, it would force me, I felt, to think about the structure and the grammar of how I was using the camera and how I was even looking. But I should say, I proposed to do it without knowing how to do it, without knowing what to do, really. So the first way in which it existed, the first way in which it was shown, and I'm going to show you some images from this, was as a kind of prologue or a work that kind of identified the questions that were there for me. And in a second, I'm going to share my screen. So this is the first installation of it, very simple, 3 screens, but also the process was one of a lot of collaboration with women that I felt were doing with their bodies and their work what the characters in the book were doing. So I felt like maybe if I just watch what they're doing, if I just pay attention in this way, the film will make itself for me. And so this here is Marien Vélez, who is a lighting designer. And so the first thing we did was to collaborate in this process of creating a light language. And so one of the screens of the installation basically we took all of the phrases in the book that described the light and adapted those. And the installation, this first installation of the work, also contained some objects that were made as props for the film. This is another installation of it, but here you can see, in a way, the installation also was meant to show that it was something in process. That here were masks and objects that were going to be used in the making of the film. One of the screens also was, you can see there that there's 2 that are sort of participating in this creation of the light language, and then one screen in the middle that was mostly a documentary piece focusing on Eva Ayala, who is a union organizer. Here are some of the stills of that first iteration of the work. I think of it as a prologue because I feel like it did not answer questions, but helped me define what some of those questions were. But I also understood it as a bit of a failure. I would say, not a failure to be sad about, but a productive failure, one that shows you which way things are not supposed to go. And opens up other directions. Then I will show you some of the stills from the most recent process and images from the the installation in Pivô. So here are some images. So the second part of this process involved, I would say, even though I mostly work with non-actors, and this is something made mostly with non-actors, more a script and a structured improvisation that is based on this original script. Part of it was shot in a studio in MPAC in New York, and part of it was shot in Puerto Rico. So a lot of the, I guess I would have to describe a bit of the process of shooting is not, it's not a huge camera crew. It's basically a 5-person crew with 7 non-actors, and we're spending something like 10 days together in this farm, and starting out from these structured scenes that are based on the book, and then improvising. You can see some of the masks and objects that were there in that first installation, but in fact, I ended up not using all of them. And they sort of exist as these objects that circulate around the work. So one really interesting difficulty of this translation from a text to a film is that the kind of experimentation that Wittig was doing with language, something happens when you put this language in specific bodies. The process of abstraction that was taking place in the text is no longer possible. The body takes over. And then I'm gonna show you also a few images of how this looks in Pivô, because the space really also makes some decisions itself. Wow, there's really no way to explain Pivô space without being there. It's a kind of beautiful maze. In the book, the proper names of the women are very important, not as a graphic element, as a symbolic element. So the names are written in different parts of the space. This is a project that I'm working on both as a single channel piece and as an installation. So in a way, the way that one walks through the space became the timeline, a kind of cyclical timeline. The book is itself structured in a circular way. The circle is an important element of the book. So the shape of the way that one walks through the space or one experiences it becomes also a part of the work. And then I'm not going to show images from this, but an important element of the work in the space in Pivô is the soundtrack that was made by the band Rakta, and they played a live score on the opening of the show, which was like its own experience. All right, so I'm gonna leave it there. And this is a project that I still find it really difficult to talk about, because I feel like I'm in the middle of it and still making it, and probably will keep going with it for a while. All right, that's it for me.
Thank you. It was very great to revisit this project that I'm super involved in with a sort of distance. So I think for us to start the conversation, I would like to, actually we are focusing on Oriana and Latin America, but this week I was going back to your other works. So I couldn't avoid trying to find this very specific matches between not only subjects, but in a way the camera moves, in the way that you play with perspectives, with like breaking linear times, and what you reinforce or what you deviate from. So there's a line that is said by Pablo Diaz Cuadrado in Beatriz's film Matruja, shot in Puerto Rico in 2014, that she's following him in his house while he supervised the decomposition and reconstruction of everything that is around him. And then at some point he says, if you don't change everything, you don't change anything. So I think maybe this is like a quote that I wanted to throw to the conversation, because I think a change in perspective, either personal or cinematic, is a good starting point, nevertheless. Mm-hmm. So it's not exactly a question, but actually an excuse to hear you speaking about the way that, first of all, I think you deal with time, or like to borrow Tarkovsky's famous keep sculpting time and these things. Then I know that montage and sound editing, like Bea already mentioned. And I think to bring in your specific relationship of the soundtrack made by your father, the artist, fantastic artist, Guilherme Vaz, in the specific film, but also underscoring a lot of your projects. So it's more like a mess of things that starting points that I want to throw to you and see what comes out of that. Starting from Pablo's quote.
Pablo's quote is super strong, and actually brings me to one of the notes that I took watching this kind of labyrinth, Bea, that is Oriana, of experiences and ideas. And it's so strong because, of course, I love Wittig's book, and for me it's one of those books that are almost impossible to make an image of, because it's always pointing at an image that it's impossible to see. So it's this thing of image, and I think it makes a lot of sense that you took it towards the body, so rather than just thinking about language, going towards the body, which I think it's an extremely important element in, of course, écriture féminine, and the whole movement of feminists trying to think of a language that was not only coming from the mind, but that was coming from the whole body. And this takes me to, it's said in Portuguese. I'm going to say it in Portuguese and then I'll translate it. And it's cortar o último vínculo que as prende a uma cultura morta. To cut the last link that holds them to a dead culture. Which is very strong, but straight away resonated with me a lot, because I think that in many ways this inheritance, this toxic inheritance of a culture that makes itself dead and that it's constantly killing, so be it the spectral haunting of the colonial history that we carry in the Americas as this kind of dead body that we're consistently having to kind of carry with us, and make meaning of without having the means to make meaning of, so this kind of astonished relationship with history, which is something that I feel a lot also from a personal perspective, coming from where I come from, and trying to dream up or think of means of creating a lively culture, a culture of the living, rather than a culture of the archive, of culture that is consistently trying to pay ode to what's before. Which funnily enough makes me think, Fernanda, because we had a very good conversation about this the other day. So this kind of spiritual inheritance of someone like my father, who created so many wonderful soundtracks and pieces and music and thinking that was so much about defying also the idea of the museum or the piece that can be inherited and transmitted. No, he wrote this really beautiful text that accompanies me a lot called "We Are the Coyote," which is a critique to Joseph Beuys's piece, I Love America and America Loves Me, in which he stays with a coyote inside a gallery for 8 days without ever putting his feet in New York City, but says that he wants to understand the coyote, that he wants to see coyote. And then my father writes this text, which he says, well, but Beuys's piece will always be incomplete until the day that the coyote will be taken to Europe with all care possible and look at the white man consistently reproducing works that are outside of himself, that are in operas, that are in architectures, that are in pieces of paper. But the coyote would think to itself, I miss the American drums, he says. No, I miss this kind of embodiment. And it's interesting to think about this, this double movement between being attached to the past and wanting to break away from the past, to look at the past, but to want to flee from it at the same time. This is really something I feel in my work, this thing, that something that pushes me from behind, because it's as if you cannot deny the past, but that you're consistently trying to flee in one way or another. I feel this movement of fleeing in a way, which in many ways I sense in many of your works, like, what do we do with the residue, of history?
Yeah, I think also maybe one thing that I keep thinking about with what Pablo says in the film about, you don't change anything if you don't change everything, which is, this desire or the idea of an absolute radical transformation, which is beautiful. I'm really attracted to looking at it and finding, like, what does that look like? But it's also violent. And in Wittig's texts, she embraces that violence completely. She looks at it really head on, and instead of going, no, we can't look in that direction, she looks completely in that direction in detail. And of course it's a vexing question, because there is no origin to go back to. There is no idea. There's this idea of like, no, we're going to rescue this other pure way of seeing things, or there is a completely anti-patriarchal way that can be just born. Doesn't seem to exist, really doesn't. So it's all, like, we have to be walking in the mud all the time and trying to step away from ourselves and going, and even asking, is this way that I am looking, is this way that I am holding the camera, is this way that I am structuring this, is that, cutting the link, or is that reestablishing the link? Or is there, and what is there, in between or next to, or not sort of tied in this dance, which is something, I guess something that I think about a lot, because I don't, and one of the reasons why I make work that's always trying to look outside and to pay attention to other bodies, to other people, to other landscapes, and is because I don't think that it can come from within, or rather that I don't trust things, that kind of coming from within expression. There's some wild stuff going on outside. I don't know if you can hear my soundtrack, street soundtrack. Yeah.
Maybe it's the monkeys coming back.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Well, yeah, I think it's
a curiosity, can I ask?
Yeah.
Bea, your relationship to making images, to the camera, how is it?
What do you mean? What like is it something that I like? That I have a camera in my hands all the time, or is that what you mean? Like,
yeah,
in a
like
physical way?
Do you physically feel like you need to be with the camera, behind the camera, in front of the camera? What's your relationship to this apparatus? It's something that I wondered.
I guess one of the, I have to be making the film to think. So very, very hard to sit beforehand, structure things or write everything out and go out and make what it is I imagined. Maybe, I mean, I would say it bores me, but it doesn't just bore me. I feel like I actually cannot do it. And then also I recognize that it is as I am looking and listening with the apparatus that ideas, relationships flow. Maybe it's also because when you're looking through the camera or when you're thinking with the camera, it's creating all these other relationships that are not there when you are alone, when you are thinking without the machine. So, and all that, in a way, it adds, it kind of adds a sort of meaning making machine as well. Like you start seeing all these connections that you otherwise would not see. I'm sure you've had this experience of looking at footage that you yourself shot, and suddenly you're seeing things in it that you had not noticed in the moment, and you're seeing relationships that you had not seen before. And then, of course, because when you're editing, you can, put times together, put, sound and image together in a way that is not the way that you experienced it. Then you sort of start, making a knot that otherwise would not exist. And all of that is a kind of thinking as well. That you, at least for me, what is your relationship to the camera?
Similar in a way, of course, because I think it took me a long time to kind of undo the baggage of film schools that's always telling you that filming is about certainties. It's about, you go into the set and you know stuff, you know what you're going to do. And even though when I started making films, I was working with found footage a lot, so I didn't have that experience. But then when I put myself in that experience where you have a set and you have 5-6 people looking at you saying, okay, so what's going to happen? For me, this was like mortal, fatal. Yeah. Like really not at all a way that I can think. And something happened that for me was very strong, which was in the middle of a film that I was making also in the Center West called The Age of Stone, in which the actual director of photography, who I've also worked with for A Noite na América, who is someone who I've known directly and indirectly for many, many years, Jacques Chewish, who was very experienced, he looked at me and said, Anna, I feel like you should just take the camera in your hands, because what you're trying to communicate with me, I can't see and I can't understand, but I know that you can. And I remember physically the feeling of taking on a heavy Aton 16mm camera into my shoulders. And all of a sudden, what you just described in terms of like looking back at footage and seeing different things, I kind of felt this kind of prosthetic thing with the lenses and how lenses are capable, of course, directly of shifting the way in which you look into the world as a kind of cyborg machine of sorts, of like, okay, zooming in, focusing and focusing. This is for me all also about creating relationships and becoming less myself. So this thing about the subject also, which I think is interesting, what the camera does when you use the word camera as if it was also an ally, like a person. I think there's something of that too, of like it's no longer me I'm looking at,
yeah,
focused on the subjective as if it was me on a subject scene. But I don't think it's just that. I think there's a kind of a reciprocal relationship between what the camera is capable of making you see and how you control it, that's already a kind of a dialogue that all my films are made from this precise process, I feel. Ever since I discovered that, it was freedom for me.
Yeah. I think that it's kind of like the moment you have the camera in your hand, it's not just you, it's you and a room full of people. Because you bring the structure of how it will be seen and experienced as well with you. There's this funny, ridiculous meme that I remember looking at a few months ago that was like, you send the email and then immediately you're reading the email again from the other person's point of view, to see how it feels. And so when you have the camera, on you, it's like this thing where you're looking and you're also, you're looking at how it will look as well, which is complicated because not everybody will look in the same way. And so it's a question that has come up for me a lot when I'm making a film with a group of people, here or in Haiti, and I'm thinking about how we're all experiencing the moment and then how that image will travel and create different meanings in different contexts, sometimes that are completely separated from what was happening at the moment. So there's all that thinking as well. Some of that thinking happens in the editing, when you can then go like, okay, this, not this, turned into something else, or but I think that it's like a dispositif that can be almost also like the analyst's couch, that has, it's not just what it does, but that it has this history that it carries with it. And so whenever you are with it, or others are around it, then it brings in this history as well. And that is both good and sometimes a problem. And, but one thing that I thought about watching your films, which is it's so incredible. When I was watching all your films together, I thought about, it's amazing because probably some things that you can't see yourself when you're looking at all the films together, you see the ways in which they talk to each other. And it's something that I imagine happens as well. Somebody else sees all of my work together, where it seems really like here I am thinking that they're each very different things. But in fact, when you look at them all together in 4 hours, it's almost like different chapters.
Weaving threads also.
Right. And you see even people coming back, and you start recognizing, at least when I was looking at your work, I was thinking, sorry, I don't even remember where I started with this, but I just remember thinking this, I can think with you. I can think with you in a way that is really about the way that the film is put together. That is not, there is not rather a manipulation of a viewer, but that there is a proposal to think with, and that seemed really, that was really beautiful.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Bia. I'm glad you feel that way, that you feel welcome, into that world. It's true that there's something that we don't, of course, recognize straight away. So that there we go again, you go to the analyst couch, the whole process, the long history between psychoanalysis and cinema, which is at the origins of cinema, but an interesting part of it, which I think is the reoccurrence of things that are hauntings that we don't yet understand, the thing that when a film starts being elaborated in your mind, you feel, oh, wow, I don't understand this object and I don't know what it is. So there's something kind of wild and savage, I think, about the process of actually going through the experience of making these films and then going into the editing suite and looking at the images as a big process of analysis, again, not just of ourselves, but of ourselves in relationship to these worlds, in your case, also to these people, to these histories, I must say I was amazed at the amount of amazing animals that appear in your films over and over again. Horses and cows, really, they come back again and again, and their posture and gesture as at once kind of very material, real characters, but also as mythic characters. No, always a kind of a very fine line between something that's very everyday and quotidian, and something that is just touching on a different dimension, no? That we could call it many different things: historical, spiritual, trans-like. No, I was thinking a lot today about this tendency of almost falling into a trance that we never quite follow, because you always bring us back. There's something of that, no? Even in Oriana, I was moments that I was so there with them, because it's so physical, of spending time, spending real time with them, which is different from your other films. I felt that there's something about time in Oriana that I was curious to actually even hear you speak about that, because of course there's the circular time of the circle that opens the novel, which is so wonderful, but there's also this slowing down of time. It's almost a malleable, water-like time, which is different now from the ways that you were making and editing images before. How do you feel about that, like time?
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, it has something to do with trying to be in the time of the text, but I think maybe there's something actually that's like accidental, in the sense of because they are improvising within a much tighter structure than what I'm usually doing, which is much a bit wilder, because we are, even though the structure is different, it's less people, it's non-actors, etc., we still were shooting scenes. And so there was just a different kind of sense of time that opened up there, because the incorporation of these characters, the becoming of these characters in their bodies took time. And all of that is on screen and not something that is off screen. Yeah.
And then you're imagining, like, because I was imagining the film together, it'll be an epic. It asks for that kind of epic time in a way, but an epic time in which no epic climax kind of happens, which is
right. It's an epic time in which, the things that are most important are, the way that, they're next to each other, or the way they eat or look at each other, or the way sweat looks, on somebody's brow, or the light in a particular moment, or the smell of something. And all of that is, I was thinking, it's not that it's hard to put into a film, it's that I don't have the language for it yet. But in a way, that's sort of that's what's the interesting thing for me, or why I'm okay with sort of constantly failing at these, translations, is because it lets you know that there's still something else that, might be done. Still another kind of language where you might be able to get to this feeling.
Yeah, translation slippery, always.
Yeah, and then recently I started thinking, especially after after the installation in Pivô, about making films as the women that appear. So that is another kind of like way to change your head in order to produce different kinds of images. Like, I'm the person that needs to be a character.
Yeah, but again, know where you are in regards to the camera. I kind of feel like you're in that film, you're verging on falling into that world.
Right.
Well, I think we have to go towards the questions of the audience, but I'm going to steal a little bit of time and ask you personal questions that I've been dying to do. So like, I've been listening to you talk about this, like the ethics, or like how you are either in front of, besides the camera. So I'm always curious about the outskirts of the work, in the sense that like most of your films are always like collective endeavors made with many collaborations and things that come together, sometimes by chance, sometimes of an induced process, like Bea always quotes the Bohemian theater as an important methodology, or like a reference to the way that she conducts narrative, and also like this the underlying structure of affection and chance that your film seems to have. So I would like to have like this very straightforward question of like what's left out, what happens with what's left out, and also to connect this to something that I know both of you are very engaged with, which is the role of writing and the written word, either like as essays or the way that you conduct the dialogues, and what happens there, you know, which is this not perhaps the most, what is not in the visible parts of the process, and how you deal with this. So just a quick question, and then we go to the audience.
I mean, this isn't everything that is left out, but I know, because I've been speaking to somebody else about this recently, that I leave out some parts that I feel might be painful to the people that are part of it. Yeah, and that I don't, you know, because it does become in a way like a psychoanalyst couch, and not everything needs to be revealed about people that you're collaborating with. So there's that. But then there's also, maybe you could also say like there's years of friendship that are not part of that are, you know, the only reason why you're able to really work with a certain person, or like the films that I made with Jan Sosler or with Elisam Escobar, that are based on trust over many years, and of not even having thought about making a film with them during all those years. And then of course, like, you know, I mean, you leave out the commonplace in a way, you know, like you know, if you want to, you know, compress an experience, then maybe that's also something that happens, that you,
add something or not? Because I think there's a question here, like just like play a little bit with what we have in the Q&A, which I think it's actually complementary to what Abia just said, which is Joseph is asking to Bea, what happens when your non-actor subjects view the films? Is their experience part of the process?
what happens when what?
The non-actor subjects view the film, is their experience part of the process? And I know this is something we've been thinking about, so it's nice to talk.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, there's some cases, I think that, you know, for me, in many cases, it is the people who appear in the films that are my main audience, that are the people that I made the film for. And that is something, actually at the beginning, when we started thinking about the show at Pivô, the first, we weren't going to show Oriana. Oriana wasn't going to be ready for 2020, but I wanted to make work about this idea of making films for specific people, and also because when the idea of the subject, the viewing subject of film, the audience of film, is one that we imagine collectively. But when you imagine the film being seen through a specific person, different meanings arise that are not the ones that you would attach to general audience. And so I'm interested in this idea of making films for specific people. And so I think that, like, the film that I made with Elisam was for Elisam, and the film that I made with Jan Sosler was for Jan. And I hope that she is the person that actually gets the most out of the work. And the conversations that we had afterwards were really interesting. I wonder if the same will be the case with Oriana, which has less of that, like, improvisation with the person or rooted in the person's, you know, language. But maybe it will be interesting to see. Yeah.
So I think we are approaching our time limit, so unfortunately we won't be able to go through all the questions. So I don't know if you have any final considerations. I have, of course, a list of a zillion questions that we have no time to discuss, but hopefully this is keep going somewhere else.
Yeah, we're just starting. No, perhaps just to answer on your question about what remains, what's on the margins of the films, which for me, it's what makes the films happen. Actually, it's everything that's going on in this kind of circle of friendships and trips and people that you see and that you need to take films back to for them to see, just like what Bia described, which is my relationship with Ivonete dos Santos Moraes, who is the young actress who's in A Idade da Pedra, who's not an actress, who's someone who lives near Cavalcante in the center-west of Brazil, and who actually I made A Terra because I went to take A Idade da Pedra for her to see. And knowing that she was frustrated with A Idade da Pedra because she felt it was a very controlled film in a way, And so for me, it was important to make A Terra as an antidote, as a remedy to the previous one. And I felt frustrated and said, we have to come back. And I only have one roll of stock. Why don't we do something very improvised? And it was great because in that case, she was doing sound, I was doing the image, and we were very, very close. And it was it was a catch up, really. Like we were just talking about what had happened since we had made A Idade da Pedra. And it was very funny because she saw A Idade da Pedra and then she saw A Terra now when I went to take it to her, and she was like, I much prefer this one. This one is a much better film. I think we should work more like this. And I said, okay, great. So actually now we're working on some research around dances of the Center West. She dances too. And it's funny because for me, it's a film that we live very far from each other, but it's a film that's really beginning on WhatsApp, through conversations and audios and things that will certainly, I don't know, may not be in the film that we'll end up making, but that for me is already a kind of cinematographic writing. So there's lots of things that I feel that the film form with its single channel, with the cinema presentation, etc., loves to kind of throw away. And I feel one of the things that I've been increasingly trying to work towards is finding different ways of considering what cinema can be and what its experience can be beyond the film theater, beyond the cinema, and also sometimes beyond the exhibition space too. What can be a cinema of experience rather than a cinema of representation? I think this is one of my main real concerns at the moment.
I think this is a very good wrap question. We leave it for the next chapters. It's a very long discussion and speculation. So thank you, Ana and Bea. It was always amazing to listen to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cades. Thank you, everybody involved.
Yes.
Catalina, Rivka, everyone. And everyone who's there who we can't see. It feels
like sorry if you left some questions unanswered. It was a